Today we're going to be learning about levers. So in levers there's four main parts. The first part of a lever is the rigid structure. In the body the rigid structure is our bones. This rigid structure works around the fulcrum. In our body the fulcrum is our joints. In order to move this structure we must apply an effort. We apply this effort using our muscles. And then the effort is trying to move a load. So in the body, the load is the body part that we're trying to move. When it comes to levers, it's really important to remember the acronym FLE. So FLE stands for fulcrum, load and effort. And this is an easy way to remember what class lever it is. So FLE 1, 2, 3. If the fulcrum is in the middle, this means it's a first class lever. If the load is in the middle, well then it's a second class lever. And if the effort is in the middle, well then it's a third class lever. So remember the acronym FLE 1, 2, 3 when it comes to levers. Here's an example of a first class lever. We know it's a first class lever because the fulcrum is in the middle. So based on the acronym FLE, F stands for fulcrum, and when it's in the middle it's a first class lever. The fulcrum we said is our joints. On the right hand side the effort is being applied by our muscles, and it's trying to move the load on the left hand side, which is whichever body part we're trying to move. Let's look at a first class lever on an object. So a scissors is a first class lever, and this is because the middle of a scissors is the fulcrum. The load then is the blades and whatever you're trying to cut with the scissors, and then the effort is being applied to the handles. So again the fulcrum is in the middle, which makes it a first class lever. So let's look at this in relation to our bodies. So a first class lever is nodding our head. So if we look at the animation here on our left hand side, we can see that we're nodding our head and we're using our neck muscles. So this is where the effort is being applied. So the neck muscles here in the back of the head are allowing the head to move up and down. This is moving around a joint in the middle of our neck, and the load that we're moving then is the head itself. So here we can see clearly that the fulcrum is in the middle, with the effort being applied by the neck muscles at the back and the load being the head. So again, fulcrum is in the middle, so it's a first class lever. An example of this in sport would be a soccer player heading the ball. On the screen now we have an example of a second class lever. So on the left hand side we have the fulcrum, in the middle we have the load, and on the right hand side we have the effort. So if we think back to our acronym FLE, so L is in the middle, which makes it a second class lever. If we look at this in relation to an object, so an object that works as a second class lever is a wheelbarrow. So the wheel here is the fulcrum, whatever's in the wheelbarrow and the wheelbarrow itself is the load, and then the effort is being applied by the person to the handles to try and move the load. So again, the load is in the middle, making it a second class lever. So an example of a second class lever in our bodies is our ankle joint. So when we're doing things like calf raises, when we're walking, when we're running, we're using a second class lever in relation to our ankle joint. So in the animation here on the left hand side, we can see that when we make this movement in the ankle joint, so the front of our foot, the ball of our feet becomes the fulcrum, then our entire body is the load, and then the force that's being applied to create this movement is being applied by our calf muscles and our glute muscles, which is at the back of our body. So we can clearly see here that the load is in the middle, which makes it a second class lever. The thing about second class levers is they always have a mechanical advantage. And what this means basically is that with a second class lever, you have to apply very little force in order to be able to lift a big load. So here we don't have to apply a big effort with our calf muscles or glute muscles in order to lift the entire weight of our body. So if you think of a second class lever being used every day when we're walking, think of the amount of weight that's being lifted as we walk. So our entire body weight and whatever we're carrying, and we do this pretty effortlessly. So a second class lever always has a mechanical advantage. So that brings us on to our final type of lever. So on the screen now we have a third class lever. So as you can see, you can have the fulcrum on the left, the load on the right, and the effort in the middle. So when the effort is in the middle, it's a third class lever. An example of an object that's a third class lever would be a stapler. So the back of a stapler, where the hinge is, would be your fulcrum. The top arm of the stapler and whatever you're stapling becomes the load, and then the effort is being applied in the middle. So because the effort is being applied in the middle, it makes it a third class lever. Third class levers have a mechanical disadvantage. So just like we said with second class levers having a mechanical advantage, third class levers have the opposite. They have a mechanical disadvantage. So to understand this, we need to know what the effort arm and the load arm are. So in a third class lever, the effort arm is the distance between the effort being applied and the fulcrum, and the load arm then is the distance between the effort being applied and the load we're trying to lift. So here, relatively speaking, the effort arm and the load arm are the same length. So this means that this lever we're looking at doesn't really have an advantage or a disadvantage. However, if I was to move the effort, so in this case, if I move the effort closer to the fulcrum, so what I've done now is I've shortened the effort arm and the load arm becomes longer. So this works in ratios. So how long is the effort arm in relation to the load arm? And here we can see that it's much shorter. So this gives the third class lever a mechanical disadvantage. What this basically means is that I now have to apply a much larger effort in order to be able to move that load because the effort arm is shorter than the load arm. If we were to look at an object as a third class lever, an example would be a shovel. So here, the very top of the handle is your fulcrum, the bottom of the shovel and whatever you're trying to lift is the load, and then you'd apply the effort to the handle. So here we can see that the effort is in the middle, which makes it a third class lever. So in this diagram, the distance between the effort and the load, so the load arm, is much longer than the distance between the effort and the fulcrum. So if we're looking at advantages and disadvantages, because the ratio of the load arm is much longer than the effort arm, this means that this shovel, the way it's being operated, is at a mechanical disadvantage. So if I was the person using this shovel and I wanted to make it a lot easier for myself, all I'd do is I'd change where I'm applying the effort. So I'd move my hand down the handle of the shovel. And basically what I'm doing now is I'm moving the effort closer to the load. So what I've done is I've decreased the size of the load arm and I've increased the size of the effort arm. So now the effort arm is much bigger than the load arm, which means the shovel is operating at a mechanical advantage. So obviously if you're using a shovel, you're not going to be holding it at the very top, or at least you're not going to be having both hands at the very top. If you're trying to lift something heavy, like this guy is here, he's going to move his hand further down the shovel. And what he's doing is he's extending the length of the effort arm and decreasing the side of the load arm. And what this does is it gives him a mechanical advantage. So we need to apply this theory to our bodies. So an example of a third class lever is when we do a bicep curl. So here we can see in the diagram the elbow joint is our fulcrum. Then the effort is being applied by the biceps. So the bicep joins the forearm below the elbow joint, which puts the effort in the middle, which makes it a third class lever. And then the load is the rest of the forearm plus the weight that's being lifted. So here we can see the effort arm. So the distance between where the effort is being applied and the fulcrum is quite short, in comparison to the load arm, which then is quite long. So the distance between where the effort is being applied and the weight that's being lifted. So because the effort arm is much shorter than the load arm, well then this lever has a mechanical disadvantage. So this means that a much larger force needs to be applied by the biceps in order to move this weight. Okay, so if you were to change this theory, so just imagine for a second if the bicep was to join much further down the forearm. So if the bicep was to join much further down the forearm, let's say closer to the wrist. So what this would do is it would give you a mechanical advantage. So it would allow you to move that weight much easier. However, there are disadvantages to this, because if the bicep was joining the forearm much lower, well then the range of motion of your arm would become much smaller, so you wouldn't be able to move it very far. So the reason why our muscles are joined so close to the joints, especially with third class levers, Yes, they operate at a mechanical disadvantage, but what they do allow you is they allow you to create a much larger range of motion. And where this comes into play is when you're able to create a much larger range of motion, this allows you to create a lot of speed. So whilst third class levers operate at a mechanical disadvantage in relation to the amount of weight that you can lift, there's also an advantage when it comes to playing sport because they can generate an awful lot of speed because they go through a much larger range of motion. So to finish the video, we'll just look at some examples of levers from a sporting context. So the first one we're going to look at is a guy kicking the ball. So if we just focus in on the right leg, so we can see here that his knee joint is the fulcrum. His leg from below the knee joint, and when he makes contact with the ball, is the load. And then we need to look at where the force is being applied. So here to flex the leg, he's using his hamstrings. So the hamstrings join below the knee joint, which puts the effort in the middle, which makes it a third class lever. The second example we look at here is a girl doing a press up. So the feet in contact with the floor, so that's our fulcrum. Then the effort is being applied by the arms and the chest muscles, and the load then is the body weight in the middle. So here we can see that the load is in the middle, which makes it a second class lever. Finally, we look at a guy doing tricep extensions. So here we can see that the elbow joint is the fulcrum, the lower forearm and the dumbbell then becomes the load. So now we need to look at where the effort is being applied. So we need to know where the tricep muscle joins at the elbow joint. So if he was doing a bicep curl, we can see here in the diagram that the bicep joins the forearm. So it joins below the elbow joint, which would make it a third class lever. However, this is being performed by a tricep muscle. So the tricep muscle we can see here joins the elbow joint at the back, so behind the elbow. So this puts the fulcrum in the middle. So because the fulcrum is in the middle, this makes it a first class lever. So here we have 3 examples of 3 different levers in the body and how they're being used. So the most important thing to remember when it comes to levers is your acronym. So FLE 1, 2, 3. Which is in the middle, the fulcrum, the load or the effort. And once we know that, then we can classify the lever quite easily.